Morning everybody, this is Jo from Fi Angels. Where has October gone? I meant to do this video ages ago and now it's the morning of the 27th of October and I suddenly realised October's nearly at the end. I mean, I'll be doing my reading for you guys like at the weekend, so I'm really sorry that it's taken me this long because I just don't know where the month has gone. I mean, yeah, it's been busy, but yeah, it's just disappeared. So, but I'm here now, and to do the video I promised on our ancestral lines and how they can have an impact on us. And the reason that I'm doing this in October is because October and Samhain are really strong times for us to connect with our ancestors. And up until winter solstice in December, where the veil is really thin, we can really get in touch with our ancestors and our ancestral patterns, and we can really enhance those positive ancestral patterns, but we can also recognize and seek to break more negative ancestral patterns. And I think whether you're a spiritual person or not, we have a massive tie to cultures, to times, to places, to types of work that comes from our ancestral line. They're not just you happen to have been born that way. It's from a long bloodline that's led up to this point and your incarnation at this time. So for example, I have always been really called to the Celtic culture. Loved anything to do about Ireland. Now obviously I knew I had Irish ancestry. My grandparents on my father's side both came to the England from Ireland, and I know that my great grandparents on my maternal side were Irish. But I've always been really drawn to not just Irish but Celtic in particular, history and kind of mythology and all of that kind of thing. Love an accent. And then my husband a few years ago bought me one of those ancestry DNA tests, and it changes over time. The more people that share your DNA that put into the system, it changes. But initially mine came back just looking like a Pac-Man, which was like 85% Irish or something, and then the 15% Scottish. It's changed over time, and the Scottish bit has got bigger, and now there's Welsh in it. And there was so much Irish DNA in there that they could zoom in on the area of Munster, which I know is where like my ancestors on my paternal side come from. So it was really interesting that I'm born and bred in southeast England and there's no English in my DNA, which is and it made sense because I'm so drawn to the history. I mean, I made my husband wear a kilt on our wedding day. I mean, it was his family kilt because Welsh people wore kilts as well, but still, it all kind of made sense as to why I'm so drawn to that. And you will be too if you're interested in particular cultures and you really feel a connection to that, even if you've not been brought up in that. It's because there's an ancestral line that's attaching, a cord that's attaching you to that. And we are so interested, isn't it? I think if anybody's watched on the BBC, Who Do You Think You Are, where celebrities trace their family trees, it's always fascinating to watch the impact that has on them. I mean, they're going back hundreds of years. People they never even knew existed. And yet the impact that has on them in terms of learning what those people went through. Quite often when they're summing up at the end, they'll say, oh, this is why I'm like that, or that's why my family live like that, and they'll see how the impact of how somebody lived 200-300 years ago is still very strong now. So we mustn't forget the our ancestral line and how it impacts on us now. Now, let's be honest from the offset, we will all have positive and negative in our ancestral line. We'll all have people who did wonderful things. We'll all have people that just kind of lived out their life in the best way that they could at the time. And we'll all have people who did not very loving things and left a more negative energy as a result of their lives. So that's, you know, when you think about how many hundreds of ancestors you'll have all springing off in different sprigs of your tree, you know, we all will have that positive and negative energy. And it's really important that we understand what's having an impact on what. And so there's so much stuff that can be passed down the ancestral line. So your hobbies, what brings you joy, will come to some extent from your ancestral line. I come from a long line of women who bury their heads in books on my maternal side. And, you know, as soon as I could read, I was burying my head in books. You know, if you love being outside, or if you're sporty, if you go back through your family tree, you will find that repeating itself as further and further and further as you go back. Our skills, what we're good at. So if you are particularly good at managing money, then if you go back through your ancestral line, you'll probably find that you had bankers and, you know, finance people going back through your family tree. You know, if you are, you know, one of the, you know, I know that's come through my ancestral line is like magic, and spirituality comes through your ancestral line. Many people would have had to have hidden that moving forward. I mean, one of my ancestors, William Westhorpe, wrote a book about how you can, as an individual, connect to the divine, to God, in a time when that was not the done thing. And yet, and here I am, talking to people about how to connect to spiritual support teams, how to raise your vibrations, to improve your connection, how to access all that spiritual support. That's not a coincidence. And I didn't know anything about him when I started this journey. It was a kind of synchronistic meeting between my mum and auntie and people from, like, offshoot from his bit of the you know, that happened to get into contact. Not coincidence, a synchronicity. So, you know, and then it's like, oh, like I'm doing something quite similar to him, although not under the religious, you know, Christian banner. So magic gets passed down, skills get passed down, healing gets passed down, and we can all really harness that and to improve our own journey and our own gifts and skills. But we can also have more negative cords attached to our ancestral line. So, for example, if you do come from a long line of healers or people who connected to the spiritual realm, or clairvoyance, you know, wise women, there's a good chance that you've got women in your history, or even men in your history, who were tortured and burnt or drowned because of their gifts. And whilst we can harness those gifts, there may be a fear, an ancestral fear attached to that because of what happened to them as a result of their gifts. And so that fear of persecution, that fear of torture, that fear of pain, that fear of death, that fear of exposing yourself in case something bad happens to you. Now, in this day and age, we're thankfully not going to get burnt at the stake, but we may get ridiculed for it, scoffed at about it, and that can all affect our feelings of worthiness and deservedness of this gift, which can block it. And so if we don't have that necessarily in our ancestral line, if our magic ancestors manage to escape all that stuff, then we might not feel so offended when people scoff our gifts. But if you do feel very offended and it makes you not want to shine your light, then there's a good chance that it's because of an ancestral fear that's passed down. Also, things like ancestral guilt. So if some of our ancestors didn't live the most loving lives, if they were the executioner, or if they were the tax collector that kept people in poverty, or the landowner that was cruel to their tenants, or a thief or a murderer, then sometimes that guilt can get passed down. So if you're somebody who, worries about everything and feels guilty about everything and takes on everybody else's shame and takes responsibility for things that aren't necessarily yours, you might have a bit of an ancestral guilt complex going on because of what's happened in your ancestral line. So like I said, there can be positive and negative. And so what we have now with the opportunities we have now with the veil thinning is to connect to our ancestral line. Firstly, to give thanks to our ancestors, because regardless of who they were and how they lived, we wouldn't be here without them. So we have massive gratitude to give them, because they had kids and the line continued. So we and the DNA has got passed down the generations. So that's one thing we have to be grateful for. And all of the positive aspects of the ancestral growth and development that's been passed down, like a genetic memory, we have to be grateful for. And our ancestors, life is tough now, isn't it? It's tough for every generation. But there will have been really different types of hardships that our ancestors went through. I've already mentioned a few, persecution, poverty, the societal construct that meant no matter how brilliant you were, there was a massive glass ceiling for you. So if you were born into domestic servitude, or you were born into slavery, or you became a slave, there wasn't a great deal of hope for you. So it was really difficult for people to get themselves out of situations. Even ancestors who were born wealthy had, social constructs that, would have made life sometimes unbearable. Forced arranged marriages, significant domestic abuse that was not recognised, dying in childbirth regardless of how wealthy you were, and things. So they would have had very different kinds of struggles that we do, and yet they struggled and they went through it and they lived so that we can live. So like I said, all of that learning, all of that growth, all of that development is in you. It's like flowing through you, in your blood, in your energy. So we have that really, really to be grateful for. And so in the month of October, and particularly on Samhain, which we know in the West as Halloween, on the 31st of October, that is a day, that was a Celtic holiday and a Celtic tradition where we gave thanks to our ancestors. And so that's what we still really want to do. And it's just a simple way is to, leave a candle at your window, blow it out before you go to bed. Obviously, we don't want any houses burning down. But in the evening, have a candle at the window and set the intention that you welcome your ancestors in and that you thank them for all of that they did to get you to this point now. All they have shared with you through your bloodlines to get you to this point now. And it's funny because I can almost imagine my Irish ancestors doing that on Samhain, and walking around with their jack-o'-lanterns, which weren't pumpkins, and also kind of leaving little offerings to the goddess Bridget on the hearth of their home as they dampen down the fire ready to go to bed. So it's something that we can continue, and that continuing those traditions also shows that we're grateful and thankful for what our ancestors have taught us over the time. So that's what we want to do on Halloween. Just light a candle, stand around it, with whether you do it by yourself or with your family, and thank your ancestors, welcome your ancestors in, and thank them for continuing to protect your bloodline, protect your family, because you're really important to them. You know, they're interested in what you're doing. They can be part of your spiritual support team, particularly, say, you know, if you are a healer and you've got ancestors in your line who are healers and were healers in their time, they will be part of your spiritual support team. So they're still very much active in your life. Crystals that are really good for connecting with ancestors, if you want to, in meditation, are selenite, lapis lazuli, amethyst and quartz. So they're crystals to have around you and set the intention that they open the portal between you and your ancestors so that you can connect to them. But where you do have maybe more negative ancestral patterns, like I say, drug and alcohol abuse, being in abusive relationships, debt, kind of fear of persecution that in your life becomes more of a kind of a paranoia and a fear, you know, feeling that you have to control everything in your life, you know, where our ancestors may not have had any control or needed to be controlling in whatever their life was, you know, things like that, you know, family breakups, they can be karmic patterns through our ancestral line. And like if you go back in history, if you've seen that, you know, that yes, there is learned behaviour passed down from generation to generation, but it goes deeper than that. You know, so if you've got situations in your family where people fall out, don't speak to each other, for example, and you go back, you know, you'll go back more than a couple of generations and find that kind of thing. So it's part of the journey of breaking that cycle is not just about changing our behaviour in this lifetime. It's about recognising the karmic attachment and breaking it. And we do that in exactly the same way as we break patterns or cut the cords to situations that are not serving us in this life. So we can set the intention through cord cutting and through meditation with the same crystals as is good to connect. So lapis lazuli, selenite, amethyst and quartz, of meditating with those and setting the intention that we break those ancestral patterns and that we are given guidance by our spiritual support team to break those ancestral patterns, and so that they don't repeat themselves again over the next generation. So it starts, I think, with where you've got situations where you think, I don't understand how this keeps happening. I don't understand why I keep feeling this way, because there's nothing in your current life that would have led to this situation or this feeling or this fear. Then it's sitting in meditation and calling your spiritual support team around you and asking the question, you know, is this situation an ancestral pattern? And you will be given the answer. Maybe not right there and then in your meditation, but certainly within over the next 24 hours, however your messages come to you, you will get a message to say yes or no. If it's a no, then you know there probably is something from this life, and you maybe need to dig a little bit deeper to understand what that is. But you guys are experts in your own kind of journey. So I think if your gut feeling is telling you that it's an ancestral pattern, then the answer will be yes. So then it's cutting the cord to that ancestor, thanking them for what they went through in their life and what that's meant for you. But cutting the cord to whatever was negative in their life that is now attached to you. And if you know about your family history, that's great, because you can probably hazard a guess as to what it is, whether it's they suffered a trauma or they caused a trauma or traumas to people. So it's about really setting those intentions in your meditation that you learn more, and do some research, you know, if you've got the time, into your family tree, to help you maybe understand how they're impacting on you now, so that you can cut the cord to the negative and protect your energy and the rest of your bloodline for future generations from that negative cycle and that negative pattern, and harness the positive, the learning, the love of our ancestors and how they want us to succeed in this life. So, sit with it, meditate with it, ask your spiritual support team, and like I said, your ancestors are on it. So, who better to ask? Is this an ancestral pattern? And then, setting the intentions to break it, which starts with cord cutting, but it's also when those feelings start to bubble up again, or when a situation starts to rumble, you'll recognize it straight away and go, right, no, I'm not having this. This is an ancestral pattern. We can do something differently. Take a deep breath and reassess how you want to deal with that. If your previous way of dealing with that would have been to run and hide or to stamp your feet and demand that you are right and you are listened to, and that hasn't worked out great for you before, then it's like, okay, this is an ancestral pattern. My response to this is an ancestral pattern. This situation is an ancestral pattern. I'm going to change how I deal with it. You can't, affect how other people deal with it, only through you dealing with it in a different way, and start to break those patterns and break those cycles. And as it may be really, really hard, but you're doing it for your future generations, because you don't want them to keep revisiting and repeating the same stuff. So that's how we kind of deal with the negative, but we deal the same with the positive. So we know we've got ancestors, who are guiding us on our purpose, is calling on them. So when you do your prayers, and when whether you say angel, I always say thank you, angels, ancestors, spirit guides, spirit, and anybody else who's helping me right now. That's kind of ISIS. So I always include ancestors in the beginning of my prayer when I'm calling on my spiritual support team before I go to bed, in my prayers, or in the morning when I wake up, or if I'm opening up to channel. I always include them. So start adding them and start bringing them in and giving permission to be part of your life again. And start on the 31st of October with that candle in your window and welcoming them in for their continued guidance and protection of your family and your family home. So I hope that's been helpful. I'm sorry it took me so long to do it. 27th of October, it's terrible. I'll see you very soon for your November's Lightworker reading, but I will be doing that around the kind of Halloween weekend, and I will be using the Angels and Ancestors deck by Carl Gray, because what have we just been talking about? Ancestors. So let's see what they've got to say for us. So I'll see you very soon. Love and light.